Okay, we are on our way to going live, Officer Goodwin. Very loud this morning, I can tell actually. Okay, I'm just waiting for this to all pop up and make sure that we're all good. And it looks like we should be live. We are live. We are live. This does mean that I now need to catch up on social media, because as the producer and techie, now my phone's beeping. As the producer and techie, I need to obviously do all of these bits. Officer Goodwin, say good morning to everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all safe and well.
I was kind of hoping you were going to fill a little bit more than that, I'll be brutally honest.
I hope you're all safe and well and made great resolutions for the new year.
Well, we're coming up to those now, aren't we? So it is obviously a new year coming up. Now, just tell us, Officer Goodwin, how was your Christmas? Because everyone is going to want to know that. They will be asking that. So why don't you tell us what your Christmas was like?
Quiet, nothing busy, but then I don't think it was overly busy for lots of people because of restrictions. We were sort of relocated. My daughter came round on Christmas Eve with her partner, and we had a nice time and swapped presents, and I spent Christmas Day on my own, and I had a little mince pie and a candle, and I just sat there, just wished myself.
People are going to start going and feeling sorry for you. Can I just point out, I was supposed to have my parents stay with me at Christmas this year, and they couldn't come up, so I actually did invite Officer Goodwin to come and have Christmas with me and my family, and he very politely turned me down.
Yeah, kids opening presents, all that noise, guys. I'm too old for that now. I just sort of chilled out, put some little bits and pieces in the oven, cooked it all up, didn't bother with Christmas dinner, went out for a nice walk, popped up and saw my friend in the afternoon, had a couple of beers with him. Brilliant. What more could you want? Yeah,
I actually told my wife you just didn't want to come and spend Christmas Day with her, but okay, right.
So you do when you're not there.
Right, so we are moving on to talking about New Year. Now, Officer Goodwin and I had a conversation about this. We knew that actually filling 45 minutes talking about New Year, which predominantly, I guess, for prisoners is going to be a very similar process throughout prisons across the UK, is going to be quite a big task. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about New Year. We're going to talk about a little bit what would have happened. We'll probably touch a little bit more on hooch. We've got some good images that we found this week for hooch, and some prison contraband I think will pop up. There's a couple of images that have been taken from inside a prison, showing prisoners really kind of letting loose, which we managed to get hold of. So we're going to have a look at those. And then I think what we'll do is we'll just talk a little bit more around kind of what's happening at the moment with both the attractions with Shrewsbury and with Shepton specifically, and how they're closed and what we're doing, and also some of the plans going forward. So a good show for you today. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to just bring up a different image for you because it is coming towards New Year, and New Year means fireworks, and obviously fireworks in prison.
There aren't, but there'll be other things to take its place. Yeah, New Year very much is a bit like Christmas, particularly if it falls at a time when it gives you what you call that very long weekend. And for some prisons, they might close down just before Christmas and actually not reopen the workshops and education until after Christmas. So prisoners might spend this whole week, and to be honest, many of them do get bored. They get bored, they get into a routine, and there's nothing much to do. And these days with COVID, it'll be more difficult because remember, they're spending a lot more time in their cells. There are no visits. So there are no what they call domestic visits for prisoners. So that's going to add a little bit to the pressure this year that perhaps you wouldn't have seen in years before, of course. They're probably in the middle of possibly staff are around and about looking for the hooch that might be brewed up, because prisoners, in their own way, some of them, not all of them, of course, will be trying to find some way to celebrate the new year. The big time is, like in all New Year celebrations, is at midnight. I remember the very first time that I experienced this at Shrewsbury Prison, way back in the 80s. As it struck midnight, remember the prison is usually very, very quiet by about midnight, and all of a sudden this was horrendous noise, absolutely horrendous noise going on. They were smashing the doors, and there were cups being jiggled and smashed and bashed. And believe me, my heart literally stopped for about 30 seconds. I thought, my God, they're coming out through the doors. And it was just their way of bringing in the new year. And in Shrewsbury particularly, the top cells on the floors between about cell number 10 and number 17, if you look out through the window, you can see into the car park, which is just out over the wall, not far from a nightclub called the Butter Market. And there'd been sometimes some of the girls are out there at the back of there helping the boys along into the New Year's by giving them shouting and standing on the cars and giving them a bit of a dance and stuff like that. I can't go much further into that, guys. I don't know the age of the audience.
Well, I think there probably is a bit of care, but I think
it may be their partners or their friends outside shouting and bringing stuff in like that. Yes.
And it's not unheard of, is it? You know, we tell the stories on tours, and you guys tell the stories on tours. That on a Friday or Saturday night, people leaving the nightclub. You know, we are next door to a Buttermarket, the nightclub. Bit of free advertising there for them, the Buttermarket nightclub. Yeah. There you go, Grant. Is that people would walk past, their patrons would walk past, and they might flash from the road to the windows, basically.
Boys, take a look at what you're missing there.
And then, and prisoners would obviously be banging on the windows.
And to be honest, in all my experience, it's nearly always done in a good spirit. It's never been a big problem. There's not a lot of abuse coming out of the windows. It's mostly people they know out there. Remember, local prisoners, local people outside, maybe their girlfriends or their partners going home at 2 o'clock in the morning. But no. So yeah, New Year is one of those times very much like Christmas where everything's shut down. There are programs running. There might be other competitions going. There may be sort of the gymnasium or playing the different competitions five-a-side in basketball and volleyball. And they will try very hard to keep up that activity throughout that time to keep prisoners with some kind of routine, rushing and all that. Other than that, it's what it is. Although, to be fair, I've talked to, obviously over Christmas when prisoners are all out of their cells, I've chatted with many prisoners about different things, and you'll get prisoners expressing their New Year's resolutions because they say, "Have you made any New Year's resolutions, boss?" And I go, "Yeah, I made 1 or 2 and all that," and they'll do the same thing. They might say, "That's it. I'm going to get clean. I'm going to get myself fit while I've got a chance." One of the big things that many say is that this is my last Christmas in jail. Because once they step into their final year, if they're serving 4 or 5 or 10 years or more, that last Christmas for them is they're into that year when they're going to be discharged. And for them, that's neither here nor there. They go, "That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I know that I'm going home this year and I won't be coming back." Or they say they won't be coming back. Some do, of course. Yeah, so they do spend that time. The man that's in charge has just walked away, left me alone. You notice flames flickering up my legs right now. Thank you very much. Where were we?
We're a highly professional organisation, very organised.
Yeah, so like all of us, we all make some kind of resolutions. And I'm sure that many prisoners do as well, about they're going to do something different when they get out, or they're going to get fit, or they're going to get clean off drugs and stay off it and all that. And some probably go out and they succeed at that, and some will end up coming back and they don't.
Let's talk about that, Zach, because
resolutions are easy to make and even easier to break.
Well, that's one of the questions that I had for you this morning was, in your career, how many prisoners, obviously you'll have spoken to lots of prisoners, you'll have lots of prisoners say to you over the years, "Boss, I'm not coming back. Boss, I'm getting myself sorted. Judges told me this, boss. I've got a good woman for me waiting on the outside. My kids away. I've got a job, whatever it may be. I'm not coming back, boss." Does that increase at New Year because of the resolution side of things?
Do you know, I got to be honest and say, I'm not overly aware of that. I think perhaps they might express it more than perhaps they would have done it at any other time of the year getting out. One of the things I used to ask prisoners, because they used to say, "That's it, boss, I ain't coming back. I've done it. I'm not going to be doing drugs or whatever." And I go, "Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's excellent. Good on you." But then I asked them the question, "How are you going to do that?" Because the problem is, like I said, with any resolution that you decide at any time, it's easy to make the statement about doing things, but very few people actually set a plan in action about how they're going to achieve what they want, where they want to get to. And they say, "Well, I just won't be taking drugs." And I go, "Well, it's not that easy, is it? When you get outside, you get caught back up with your friends and other things in your life take place. And some people, they drift back to the addiction, of course. And I've had some prisoners say they're going to move away. "Well, when I get out this year, boss, I'm going to move away." And I go, "What? There are no drugs where you're going then?" I said, "The trouble is, wherever you go in the country, drugs are available. You can't walk away from a problem and pretend that, the reality, wherever you go, you take your addiction with you. It doesn't disappear because you go somewhere else."
It's interesting because I follow a number of Twitter accounts from people who have got drug addictions, some alcohol addictions, but predominantly people who've got drug addictions. And I follow their day to day, and a lot of it is, "I've been clean for 23 days now. I've been clean." I saw one yesterday. Somebody said that they hadn't taken cocaine for 36 days. And for them, that was a huge, huge achievement. I follow a lot of these accounts because it is a real struggle, and you know, their addiction is what it is. It's an addiction. It's a disease, but it's something really, really difficult to fight. So I follow a number of accounts like that. And just completely off the point of drugs very quickly, just because they've just popped in, and I just want to give a shout out because one of the things we love is the fact that this show is live. We can do this. So Nicky has just jumped on to say he's a first, I assume it's a him, saying first time viewer, can't say he's never been. I'm assuming he spent some time doing a bird.
Doing a bit of porridge.
Doing a bit of bird. So good morning, Nicky. Officer Goodwin will say hello.
Yes, hi, Nicky. I'm not quite sure what you meant by the first time you've never been, or
no, first time viewer, but he can't say he's never been. So I assume he's saying it's the first time he's watched a show, but he can't say he's never been to prison.
No, the reality is with prisons, a lot of people get perceptions about prisons. And the reality is people come from all walks of life, of course.
Yeah.
I've had people coming in that are well educated and bright, and they come in once and you never see them again. I've had prisoners coming in that struggle with education and they can't read or write particularly well. They'll get out and you'll never see them again. And others come in 2 or 3 times and the penny sort of drops at some stage, usually by their early mid-20s, and they realize that it ain't the best move they've made in their lives. And there's many reasons why people don't come back to prison. They might have end up in a relationship, they might have a family, they might get a job, it might be one or all of those things. It may be something we do in the prison that helps them get out and stay out. It may be one or none of those things. There's complicated reasons why people come to jail as well, you know. But so yeah, I've met people from all walks of life, and they'll all come with different attitudes. You know, I've seen the angry people come to the doors, the violent people come to the doors, the ones with serious mental health issues. I've had the comedians come to the doors. They come through and they'll have a laugh at a joke, and coming to prison is just what it is. They don't give you any bother. They just kick on. And then you've got those that can't cope, and there can be hard work to look after as well. You've obviously got a question or a statement.
I have. Sorry, Harriet's throwing paper at me as well at the same time, throwing things. Nicky's just jumped to say, actually, I'm female and I've never been to prison. Damn predictive text. But we love all of our viewers.
Well, I hope that predictive text is not a prediction of where you're going to end up in the future. So, but I'm sure you will.
Back into the seriousness, because I like I said, I've got a few things I want to share here. Scott's just jumped on to say he's been clean for 6 months, and that's a huge achievement. So fair play.
One day at a time, Scott. Always one day at a time.
And actually, there's a few people in today talking about the time they've served and stuff like that. And even Mick Freeman, who's one of our tour guides, has just jumped on to say that he was the orderly night officer on Millennial Night in the Millennium, and he said it was expecting to be really loud and it was quieter than a grave, and they had to get him going.
Yeah, weird, isn't it? Yeah. It's a sound like no other when they start banging those doors. Trust me, when you've got 300 to 400 prisoners on a wing and they all start smashing those doors up and shouting and booing and bawling and all that. It really is. We do hope that the doors are going to hold.
Yeah.
I hope those doors hold out.
Okay, so obviously in prison there's no actual fireworks.
No. Well, not that I've been aware of.
But there are, I assume, and again, it's obviously different with slightly different jails. There is actually prisoners partying, jumping around, stuff like that, and actually, you know, creating that kind of stuff. And these are images we've managed to grab from inside a jail. Yeah. I think, I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before, from a new year, from smuggled phones.
Yeah. And that I expect that to be repeated, and it will always be repeated now at these times of the year, particularly because of the amount of illegal phones that are smuggled into prisons. Simple as that. You've got a phone in a prison, you've got access to the world, to videos and to publish it whenever you want. So yeah. That might be it may look like the lighter side of things, which it relatively is by anybody's standards, but there's always a dark side to people that have illegal mobile phones in prison.
Yeah,
and I did mention a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, we spoke about the drugs. There was a drug haul that was picked up inside a jail.
Yeah.
So this was a haul that was found inside a prison, and you can, and for you and I, and for an untrained eye, you may not notice it, but I assume you'll spot it straight away, Officer Goodwin. I know I did when I looked at these photos. That is a prison bed. It's one of the new modern, almost MDF style prison beds, the wooden beds that they have inside the cells. We have some of these here at Shrewsbury, and you can see that's obviously been turned out from a cell.
Yeah, I don't think they use the old steel beds. They were just a throwback from the 1930s and 40s, and they kept them until, well, we kept ours right the way up until we closed, to be honest with you.
But if we just have a look at the contraband that they've picked up here, I mean, you've got obviously, and you'll be able to point to it if you would for me. You've got the balloons just to your right hand side, so the blue balloons and the white patch, right hand side.
Out there on
That one there. That to me looks like it's probably going to be somewhere in the lines of a cocaine or somewhere along those lines. You've obviously got bags of cannabis.
You never know what's in these things until you test them, because you've got all the drugs these days, the spice, the mamba, the monkey dust. You've got the cocaine, you may have pills. Believe me, it's whatever they can get their hands on. And remember, this stuff is coming into prisons either tucked up inside their backsides, sometimes it's swallowed into their stomachs. Drones, the big problems, I've mentioned that before. It depends on the prison you're in, of course. Some prisons are pretty tight by the way they're designed and the size of them, so drones aren't a big issue. And other jails can be quite open spaces where it's very difficult to keep an eye. And remember, drones don't come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you got the staff in. They're coming in the early hours of the morning when there's very, very limited staff within the prison. Very few staff within the prison. So,
and I know we talk about,
and it causes its problem. The drugs itself.
Yeah.
You know, I suppose you could take spice and mamba, be zonked out.
Yeah.
And you're never a problem when you're zonked out. It's a bit like heroin, really, isn't it? You're taking heroin, you ain't bothering anybody. It's when you're not on the stuff that's the problem. When the addiction starts to bite and the withdrawal starts to bite and they're up and about looking, and it's the gangs, it's the violence that's perpetrated, because gangs are going to be, particularly in big jails, vying with each other for control of the drugs market. Remember, it's a captive audience. So yeah, you can see huge problems. There are all kinds of things when prisoners, if you're running a drugs gang, you very rarely keep the drugs yourself. You're going to find somebody else to hide the drugs for you, for obvious reasons, because if you get caught with it, you're going to get extra time. If the person that you give it to or make keep it for you, they're going to end up carrying the time. Prisoners don't grass up on each other. That's the prisoner's number one rule, unwritten rule, of course. Grassing up doesn't happen in prisons.
Snitches get stitches, as they say.
Yeah. It happens in their golden rule. You could end up with very swift and painful justice.
Yeah.
And not all prisoners are volunteers to hold these drugs for prisoners. You must remember, some of them get in debt, and part of their payment plan will be to hold this mobile phone in your cell and to hold this stuff in your cell, because the screws aren't watching you as much as they may be watching me. And the reality is, if you get caught with it, they belong to you. So you can see, and then prisoners, they may not want to be involved in that. And I've known 1 or 2 prisoners, they maybe ended up self-harming, and that draws attention to themselves so that we can take them out of that environment. Or they might be violent to other people to get themselves removed from that place, to get away from that problem. They're never going to tell us, bossy's bullying me. Like I said, grassing isn't something they're going to come up and confess to easily. And so all these other things happen because of that.
And let's pick that up on another one, because I know we're gonna do some deeper dives, let's say, into the, I guess, the darker side of prison. Not that there's a bright side of prison, and again, we spoke about it a little bit. We want to, in the new year, once we get some more clearance through COVID, once we've got the new studio set up, bring in some other officers, bring in ex-governors and stuff like, even operating governors, but also we want to bring in some ex-prisoners. Yeah. I don't think we'll be allowed to bring in current prisoners.
Well, unless they're on day release.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Harriet, can we get that sorted? Can we get? I know we haven't even had any guests yet, but can we put on the list serving prisoners?
They're right to Hewell Grange open adult prison. Because if anybody,
okay, she's got it down. There's a challenge for Harriet. There's a New Year's resolution for Harriet. That's a first. That will be.
You know what they say about making resolutions? You have to make them smart. They have to be specific, measurable, accurate, or achievable. What's the other one? Realistic. Realistic and time.
Time being the operative one. I still find this really a little bit bizarre, just because it's not illegal, so it doesn't feel like contraband to the general population. But there's 13 phone chargers there, and I opened something this morning, and there was another phone charger in it. I've got so many phone chargers just lying around, and they're so easy to pick up. A couple of quid, and you've got phone chargers, and it's
where do they fit?
I know it's so weird to think that phone chargers are a high commodity inside jails.
Well, they are, because mobile
phones no use without the charger.
Most of the batteries in there are extremely difficult to change yourself. Yeah. Extremely difficult because of the way they make them these days, intentionally. So charging them, remember, they're using these phones. They probably need charging every day like everybody else.
So why don't they just hardwire prison officer Goodwin, why don't they just do away, because in Shrewsbury there's 3 plugs, three pin plugs you can just plug devices into in the cells. There's 2 in Shepton. Most jails have got them. Some even have USB plugs. Why don't they just do away with the plugs, hardwire in a kettle, hardwire in a TV, so it's literally fused in like a cooker would be in a house, and then they can't do it.
Who knows? I mean, the government do, or the prison department do things that they think it's reasonable to do, and putting plugs in, if the kettle breaks down, it's easy to replace. You haven't got to get somebody to take the covers off the wall, because remember, all those plugs will be secured into the walls. So it's easy to take the plug out, so they can get the kettle, or the TV breaks down, or whatever, you can unplug it and take it away.
I guess that's fair. I guess on the flip side of that, I would argue we're going down a hole now. I know, a rabbit hole, but I would argue saying, well, but you don't have to pat test if it's hardwired. You just do a fixed wired installation test. So what you might spend over there, you will lose over here. And
it's always a balance, but it's like all things. People say, why did it, particularly in Shrewsbury many jails, they go, why do you put ceramic toilets in a cell that are easy to smash? Why? Because they're cheap. You can buy thousands of these things and probably pick them up for £10 a pound.
Absolutely.
At least be that cheap. So if they get smashed, they're easy. You put stainless steel ones in there, which some prisons have, of course. Yes, they're harder to smash. But believe me, there are some prisons around, they can break anything that you can put in a cell. Absolutely anything. And the reality is that's going to take a lot more cost to replace these things as well. So ceramics are easy, they're convenient, and they're cheap. And that's the reality. And the sinks are ceramic as well.
Okay, well, let's move on to the other contraband. Let's move on to hooch. Nikki's just said it's the first time she's been classed as a man. Welcome to jail. Okay, hooch. So here we are. We spoke about this last week, coming into Christmas. This actually looks a little bit like, well, a bad Bucks fizz, but I guess, it's oranges.
Well, fruit will be one of the major constituents in any hooch that they make. Normally, I do remember years and years and years ago in our kitchens we used to use live yeast. And obviously some prisoners, not all, some prisoners would try to smuggle that live yeast out of the kitchen so that they can start the process of getting the brewing, the fermentation going. They tend not to use live yeast. There might be powdered yeast in the kitchens, of course, because many prisons don't make their own bread. We certainly did at Shrewsbury. We made bread rolls. So there would have been some element of yeast floating around the place. But you can pick yeast up out of normal bread. If you give it long enough, even bread will sort of have still element of yeast in it. After it's been baked, it is possible to still.
You can, as I say, you can take slices of bread, can't you, and put them into the bag and ferment it that way.
If you leave fruit long enough, it'll get that smell of fermentation, but it doesn't ferment fully, simply because it needs that extra bit of yeast in it to help it bubble up and create the gases and stuff like that. But
it's funny because my wife again is
that's deadly stuff.
As I said, at the moment my wife is making wine. She's making it out of grapes. I think she's making a plum wine as well. So she's got the fermenting stuff all going and the demi-johns and stuff like that. It takes 8. I said to her the other day when she emptied out the demi-johns when she was moving it into demi-johns, I was like, so is that ready now? She's like, no, it's been like 9 months. So I'm like, it's a long time to wait.
You can make beer in weeks, but wine takes a lot longer to get it right. To make it well, so that it matures.
But these guys make this in plastic bags and almost put it in the toilet system.
1 litre Coke bottles or pop bottles and stuff like that, and they'll try to hide it in places where it isn't going to be discovered in cells. So we might try to find what they call the common areas to hide the stuff. Some might keep it in their cells, but it's what it is. The trouble is, it can be deadly stuff, of course, because they don't have anything to measure the alcohol content in it. So this stuff could be pretty powerful and pretty dangerous.
But as we've said on numerous occasions, prisoners are very inventive, they're very creative, and in prison they have nothing but time.
Absolutely.
Loads of time.
I remember a time in prisons before they had kettles in their cells. They used to boil water in a cup, and they would get hold of a little piece of metal like a paper clip. They'd put it between 2 bits of cable, electric cable, and find a way of getting it into the socket on the wall, on the light switch socket, and you'd literally just got live wires going straight into the cup, and they would literally boil the water at that point in time.
Have a hot cup of tea.
You got this red little clip glowing away. And in plastic cups, so that wasn't particularly useful.
Funny enough, speaking about alcohol, Debbie Usher, who's an ex-prison officer.
Hello, Debbie. Nice to see you.
Is on, and she's saying years ago when her dad worked in the prisons, who you also worked with, they were allowed a can of beer. And we spoke about that, didn't we, from visits and such. Do you want to pick that one up?
Right up until into probably the mid-80s, remand prisoners were entitled to a visit every day of 15 minutes. And that's a throwback to the Victorian times when they used to literally get really pretty basic lousy food in prisons, porridge, gruel, and a little bit of bread and water and a touch of meat. Families could bring in food, but they only had 15 minutes to do that. And we kept that visiting system going right the way up until the 1990s. They took away alcohol first, and I think it was a pint of beer or a small bottle of wine. And if I remember rightly, the deal used to be is that they couldn't drink it on the visit. They used to have it taken back by an officer onto the landing, and the prisoner would turn up with their cup. It would be poured into the cup, and they had to stand there and drink it in front of the officer. They weren't allowed to walk away with it because they might be saving it up or selling it on. Food didn't stop being brought into prisons until 1991, because I remember it here at Shrewsbury. There used to be a little back room where the food was all searched. So there were people coming in, visitors with their 15 minutes. We used to give them a bit longer if we could, 20, 25 minutes. And they've got their curries and their pies and their cakes and their puddings all coming through the door, which has to be searched. And it had to be eaten while they were on the visit. No food was allowed to come back out and up onto the wings. So it's the old story of searching for the file in the case.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got one. Yeah.
I'm just
is quite correct. And I remember that. I do remember that. So
we've been doing this for a long time, Officer Goodwin.
since the 70s.
So I'm just going to pick this up very quickly. Scott, who actually jumped in earlier, he said he'd been clean for 6 months. He spent time in Shrewsbury prison himself, said it was a very good prison. First came in when slopping out was still there, no toilets and cells, no TVs.
Pre-1995 then.
Scott, but he's put some really good points, saying that radio messages from family over Christmas and New Year meant a huge amount to them. Really sort of help get them through. He's also confirmed they used to get their electric off the lights in the cells, used to pull the wires out the lights, which is what you were just sort of talking about. And he can remember making things out of matchsticks.
Yes.
He's not saying what he's made out of matchsticks, and he's just confirmed they used to get used from the kitchen orderlies. So it's there, it's all there, it's everything, everything you say.
I'm not making this up, guys.
But they said he made a lighter with a mop head as a wick.
Yes.
And jewelry boxes, etc., and stuff like that.
Well, the thing about the old-fashioned mops, you see, with the big long white wicks in them, they tend to burn slower and longer than anything else, because if they would get a light of somebody else very often just before they got banged up at night time, which going back to his time would have been just after 5 o'clock at night. They might come out for a very quick slop out later on, but they would light that, and it would last long enough by keeping it lit for a few hours until they got their heads down. So they could have their last few cigarettes perhaps up till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, because many of them didn't have matches, or they didn't. We've had a various safety matches and lighters in prisons over the years. Although, I don't know if Scott's aware, there's no smoking in prison anymore at all.
There isn't now, but he's just, again, I know this was a question, I think it was asked a couple of weeks ago that we picked up on, but he was saying that the lines between the cells, they used to rip the blankets and the bed sheets and effectively turn it into string and use that to pass stuff between the windows.
Yeah, you'd see it swing. You'd be walking outside, you'd be seeing it swinging either going down or up the landings, or being swung across, because the stuff wouldn't fit under the doors, and there was staff up on the landings, of course, so you'd spot it up, and it might be tobacco being pushed back and forth, probably the occasional drugs.
Harriet, Harriet, can you stick Scott on our list for a visit, please?
Yeah.
She's on it.
Scott will remember that slopping out was never the most pleasant thing for them, and it certainly wasn't particularly pleasant for anybody. When they brought toilets into the cells in Shrewsbury in 93 to 95, we came back down to 2 men, because at some stage there we had 3 men in these with their little plastic potties. I'm all for hygiene. I've always been for hygiene. What's good for them, hygiene is good for us at the end of the day. And it's basic human decency. I don't have a problem with them having toilets in their cells, and hot and cold running water, of course. But slopping out, no. You'd come in the morning, and when you've got 350, nearly 400 prisoners on that one wing at one stage, all trying to make their way to a recess on each landing to slop out. No, not good at all. So there've been some good moves within the prison system, some good modernizations, and there's been some pretty bad ones as well over the years. And Scott will remember a time too when letters were vastly very, very important to prisoners, very important, because this was before phones came into prisons. We used to put phones on the landings originally. You may not be aware, but they're starting to put phones in all the cells. To the prison. So letters were very, very important to prisoners receiving mail. And I could guarantee you, if we hadn't collected the mail, because we used to have to get it out by lunchtime, because it had to be censored, the prisoners would be there straight after lunch. As a mail come up, boss, as a mail come up, boss, particularly at Christmas, a lot more time, connections with their family. And if for some reason a letter never turned up, you could see that after a day or two, some of them would start to get a bit panicky. Oh, you sure, boss? You know, because they couldn't phone up anybody to check that the letter had been sent. They just literally, we said, we don't know. If it isn't with us, it must still be with the post office. We have no control. When it comes in, you get it. Once it's been censored, you get the mail the same day as it comes to the door. They censor mail because sometimes prisoners were allowed to be sent money by their families in the form of usually postal orders. So somebody's got to open that, check it, write it down in the book and get it recorded. And then you're obviously looking for the other stuff that maybe in the letter that you don't want to find underneath the stamps, underneath the sticky bits, folded between the bits of paper and stuff like that. So letters were vastly, I think prisoners still do write quite a lot today.
Yeah.
But not as much for obvious reasons. When they brought out phones, prisoners, it's just easier and far more convenient. And that's true of all of us. I think very few of us sit down and write letters to anyone these days. We might do it by text, or we might do it by a quick email, but we don't formally write like we used to. So yeah,
I was watching a bit of a documentary the other day on I think
Scott must be nearly as old as me.
I was watching a documentary the other day on the Norwegian prison system and talking about how different that is, and it's really hard to watch because you're watching. I can't believe that the prisoners are treated almost like they're in a hotel. There is different levels of obviously category, and they were specifically showing those that are in for a shorter period of time. But their reoffending rate is undeniably low. So the rehabilitation rate is fantastic. They have such low reoffending. There must be something in that system that works.
I think that we have to think about it in a broader term because it's not just about what they do when they go to prison. You have to look at Norway's whole social security system.
Yeah.
So you're talking and looking at prevention when children are growing up and going in. So they have that social network that may be perhaps more supportive than ours is. And then you've got the educational system is different. And they tend to invest far more money in all those things, not just while the prisoners before prison, prevention, while they're in prison, rehabilitation, and aftercare. When they get out of the establishment, very many prisoners, and I'll be honest, in this system, there is some aftercare in the country, but many prisoners are let out to these doors and they have nowhere and nothing to go to. No particular plan, other than reporting perhaps to probation service, because they're going to be on license, most prisoners. And that's a big task then to start sort of trying to get into places. You know, I always said it's hard enough to get a job when you don't have a criminal record. You can imagine the hoops you're going to have to jump through after. So Norway does something drastic. They spend far, far more than we do on the prison system, and the results are there to show. That's why they're, but it's about their society. Perhaps they invest in society in a different way than we do. You know, they do spend considerably more money on the whole process, and I'm talking about right through the whole system, not just on prisons. And I'm going to be honest, it's a personal opinion, guys. If anybody on there from the department is watching this, the department look at cutting costs.
Yeah.
Whatever we get that's brought into a prison will come at the cost of taking something else away. And I can literally prove that if I have to, because I've been in the job long enough to see how it works. They'll always say you can have that, but the budget doesn't change. In actual fact, I think for the last 15 years, we've had to reduce the budget year on year on year on year.
It's that age-old argument. I can remember this when I worked for the councils years ago, because I'm getting that old. And I remember that when they were there, it was always that thing. When you get to the end, you have to spend your budget because if you don't get it, the year after, it'll get taken away.
Yeah.
And I mean, we obviously run multiple businesses, as some of you will know. So we've got different companies. We don't run any of our budgets like that. Officer Goodwin doesn't have too much to do with our budgets now, other than bringing the money in through the door. But the site managers, if they don't spend the budget in a year, it doesn't get taken away. They can still put that back in for the year after because there may be a specific reason why.
Well,
or they can over.
I've always thought that quite like any money that's saved, wherever it's saved, particularly the public service, should be to expand and improve the system next year because you've made the effort to save it this year and go, we can get something extra next year out of that.
Yeah.
But public departments go, well, if you've managed on that, we're not going to give you any more than that for next year. And that's probably been quite common within public services for a very, very long time. They'll dress these things up as investment, but the reality it comes at a cost.
And one of a few reasons why our business has been able to survive through COVID and through COVID lockdowns, and we've chewed through nearly just over £200,000 now in our businesses from being closed. And that's one of the reasons why we've been able to continue on, is because our managers are very good with the way they manage their budgets, and also we are not restricted from from a higher up level, from a sort of CEO level.
And the fact that you didn't pay us for the last 6 months.
Well, you know, that obviously goes without saying. Don't say that, because there's anybody watching from like.
It's a joke, guys.
I was going to say I'm going to be in trouble later.
As bosses go, he's right up there.
I don't know why you're saying 6 months. I've paid you for the last 6 years. Let's move on. What I'm going to say very quick is there's actually a few
Questions?
Prisoners. I was going to say there's a few guys. If you would be willing and happy to jump onto one of the shows at some point in 2021, if you could just drop us a message, whether you're on watching this on the Shrewsbury prison page, the Shepton Mallet prison page, the Officer Goodwin page, or my page, if you drop us a message, one of our team will absolutely pick it up, and we'll be able to organise a date in 2021 where we'll get you into the new studio.
Yeah.
You can have a chat with Officer Goodwin. Obviously, we'll put it all live, and you can tell us about your experiences from the other side of the bars.
Don't turn up unless you're legally entitled to be.
Yeah.
Or you take the odd day off. Hurry up, boss, I got to be back before bang up. That doesn't work, does it? No.
Okay, look, somebody has asked a question, and I know the answer, but I'm looking forward to the story. Have you ever found anybody smuggling something in?
Yeah, a number of times. And for me, I remember rightly, it's mostly been through the visits. Oddly enough, the oddest one that I saw was somebody was trying to pass some money. A young lady was trying to pass some money across to her partner, and she was already looking inconspicuous. She was looking conspicuous by trying to look inconspicuous.
Yeah.
There's something about the way that they sort of start to get a little bit nervous, and you can see it. And I was watching. I said to my mate, I said, "She's going to pass something in a minute." And he said, "No." I said, "You watch. I can tell by the way she's sitting there. She's looking nervous for a start. She's sort of casting her eyes around more than you would normally. On a visit, you tend to focus very much on where you are." And I just saw the little hand sit on the table, never did anything. And then bit by bit, the other prisoner, and literally she just passed it and he put it in his hand. And this time there was no reaction from the prisoner. I actually walked up and tapped him on the shoulder and said to him quietly, I said, "Do me a favor, just show me what you've got in your hand there." And he looked at me and I said, "Just open your hand up." And he opened it up and there was a £10 note in it. And there was no problem with that.
Yeah.
There was no problem with that. I took it and said, "You do realise what's going to happen at this point, do you?" He said, yeah, okay, boss. And it was a fair cop. And he said it was a fair cop. There have been other staff that have had to be involved in getting hold of prisoners that have got drugs. They've tried to swallow the drugs while they're trying to take it off them. And there's been 1 or 2 officers that have been assaulted quite seriously in the visits room because it ends up in a tussle and ends up in a fight. One officer here got a serious punch in the face where he lost literally 2 or 3 of his teeth. And he had to go and have serious operations to get all his teeth repaired.
And you've got
all that over finding somebody with drugs on a visit. Yeah.
And you've got what, around 20 odd prisoners in visits?
We're quite small. We had space for 25 prisoners, but
Yeah.
that includes 3 adults on a visit
Yeah.
and children. So you can have up to 120 odd prisoners, and that ours is a
120
relatively
people.
small prison.
Yeah, so you can have up to 120 people in visits,
Oh yes, yeah.
which would
Families,
in
visitors,
theory
children.
be about 25 prisoners.
Yeah.
To what, 4 officers?
There's 4 officers, or 3 or 4 officers on the visit. There's also cameras floating around.
So you can get pretty heavily outnumbered quite quickly in
you're
that
always
environment.
outnumbered in a prison.
Well, that's true.
Always.
Yeah.
You know, I've always said to people, this is not Iron Man suit that I'm wearing here, or that I wish it were. I've told many people that on landings with 330, 350 prisoners out of their cells, you've got about between 6 and 8 staff. Shrewsbury used to have 8 staff on 4 landings. Not on each landing, 8 staff, 2 on each landing. And that's why there are 300 odd prisoners out of their cells. And I'm going to be honest, you don't run prisons without some cooperation from the vast majority of the prisoners. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
You don't run
always
prisons
said
by
that.
power of force.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, you've always said, and
Yeah.
Keith has reiterated, as is Mick, and as is every prison
Yeah.
officer I've spoken to, other than 2, have told me that prisons are always run by the cooperation of
It
the
has to be.
prisoners.
When there's only 8 of you on a landing, and they're all out of their cells, if something kicks off, the reality is there are always going to be troublemakers in prison. There's always
Yeah.
going to be the pushers and the dealers and the troublemakers. There's always going to be the prisoners that can't cope, the ones that have got learning behavioural difficulties that may be picked on by the others. But I've many a time on these landings, there's been prisoners having a bit of a set to, bit of a punch up, and staff have rushed there, the bells have been pressed, and we literally get hold of the prisoners, restrain them, and other prisoners are just there. Some will stop and watch, some will carry on with their business. And basically, we sort of rely on that. We rely on the fact that we can do that, take those prisoners away, and all the other prisoners are not going to get involved.
Yeah.
It can go wrong, don't get me wrong. Depends on the mood of a prison at the time and what the pressures are within a prison. But I can say in Shrewsbury, you know, and I've even seen prisoners step in and help staff. Don't mean by restraining prisoners, but some prisoners get good relationships with some staff. They see a staff member getting assaulted, and I remember seeing it literally on that landing that you're looking on there.
That's why I put it up. I was
and
hoping
he
it
came
would
up
prop
there,
up.
and the prisoner stepped up to cell what was going on and grabbed hold of the prisoner and literally just threw him down the right side. And he literally said, "There's a bit of bad language, but I won't use it.
Don't use it.
Effing leave him alone. He's a decent screw." So there must have been a relationship working there, and that prisoner said, "He's one of the, you know, he's all right," because like anybody else.
It's as you say, you build a relationship of trust, don't you?
Yeah, some you can build a relationship, some you can't. It's just the nature of the job. And I've been in prisons, I can't literally get on with it all. And they can't get on with me. And I go, but they'll find somebody else that they can get on with. And another officer go, "I don't have any trouble with him." And I go, "He gives me nothing but grief. Well, he doesn't give me any problems." So it balances out, and I can manage prisoners that other staff struggle with, you know.
I'm going to move on to something that's coming in. It's not really a question; it's more of a statement, and it'll be interesting to just get your feedback on this. Gemma's put up some morning, Gemma, just saying it's so frustrating now due to COVID that there is no education or rehabilitation happening within prisons.
Yes. Yeah, one of the dangers at the moment with COVID, there's a hugely restricted regime, and who knows, and there's no visits, which are very important to prisoners. This causes its frustration, and there's a limit to everything at the end of the day. I believe many prisons make big efforts to get prisoners out in small numbers, in small groups, to do things where it's relatively safe to do so. But with the infection rate increasing, there's a problem. Remember, many prisons, there are hundreds of thousands of prisoners coming in and out of jail every single year. Hundreds of thousands. When you think of places like Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, and London, the big ones that run the courts, prisoners are still going back and forth to courts. They're having to go out, come in, and getting bail and not coming, you know, getting arrested and brought to prisons. So those infection rates that may be higher, it's a big risk in prisons. But you're quite right. Yeah, you know, the programs have to take second place, as they do with everything.
And unfortunately that's happening. We're gonna round up in a second. We'll talk very quickly about what's happening with our two prisons as attractions. But that's happening obviously across the country in terms of people can't get certain treatments for different illnesses and sickness. We were having this discussion yesterday when we were over a cup of tea, in the sense of there's lots of things that people can't currently do because COVID's restricting that for one reason or another, and hopefully that will go away sooner rather than later.
Well, a lot of people talk about, oh well, it's a bit like the flu, and there's not. I said there's actually 70,000 excess deaths in the country. It doesn't matter what they're excess deaths, and somebody's got to explain where those excess deaths come from, and that's over the last 5 years period. And it's not that; it's all the cancelled operations for people that have got things like cancer, or children waiting to go to hospital for serious operations. We haven't got the beds. Why? Because we've got it full of COVID.
And I was seeing a debate.
There's only so many beds in the hospital. There's only so many staff, and they're working extremely hard.
I was seeing a debate going through social media. I think it was day before yesterday, and I was just watching it unfold, and somebody was very much pushing the point that, you know, the survival rate of COVID is 99.2% survival rate. We should just get on. And then somebody else popped up and said, well, the survival rate for testicular cancer is 98%.
Yeah. And the survival rate for driving is even higher.
Yeah.
Because I did some figures the other day for the upper season. We drive on average just about 278 billion road miles every year in this country. The death rate in there is 0.00000001888.
Yeah.
Now that is so low. You go, why does anybody wear seatbelts?
And do you know, so funny that you say that, because I saw this. I saw this morning on LinkedIn.
Nothing to do with prisons, of course.
I saw this morning very much on LinkedIn by somebody that I know, by somebody that runs a business. They actually, I tried to get in on as an investor in one of my first companies years ago, and he's been hammering the government the whole time, saying how wrong they've got everything, how lockdown shouldn't happen, we should just crack on with our lives. Which is an interesting perspective on it. And he posted an article this morning talking about how there's more deaths from traveling on the roads than there are from COVID, and therefore we should stop. Are we going to stop driving? I was like, but there's so many more people that drive. It's a comparison.
In actual fact, the death rate for this country for driving is about just over 1,700.
Yeah.
It's the second best rate in the world, and Holland is the first.
We've got right down a rabbit hole here. Harriet's like, change lanes.
1,700 is not 70,000.
I'm going to pick this one up because Sarah's asked an interesting question. So morning, Sarah. She has asked, would you recommend joining the prison service at a young age, 18 to 20?
Right. Okay. That's from my perspective. I think 18 can be a little bit young. It's a personal because you can be 18 in this job and actually work in a prison where prisoners have to be 21. And remember, you're still in education right the way up
That's
to
interesting.
18.
Oh, you can work in a prison.
Yeah, yeah, and the prisons are
That is,
21 years old.
yeah.
Because adult prisons are 21, of course. And the danger you've got is people that are going, obviously they're in school till they're 16 and in some kind of education or training up to the age of 18. And you're asking them to step into a world that's nothing like any other world. Not all, but there are going to be an element of prisoners that are past masters. They're good at manipulation, they're good at intimidation, they're good at managing, and they're going to look for the weakest links. They're going to try to corrupt the weakest link, if not corrupt them to do things and bring stuff in, it may be to manage their behavior on the landing. So the prisoners are running the landing and not the officer. I've always said this job is nothing if it's not a job of competence. You need to, because when you're standing in front of a prisoner, you can't just walk away from that situation if things are not going the way that that prisoner likes. Because the minute you step back and let that prisoner do what they think they should be allowed to do, you're going to end up with every other prisoner watching you. And that means you might lose. And it tends to be more for the younger people because they haven't had that experience in life as you get older. But not all. Some 18-year-olds will join and make first-class officers. But I think generally it's just a little bit too young. And many of them don't stop long.
And a sense of humour. Every prison officer I've met, other than two, and I've met quite a few now,
very dark
all have a sense of, all have a very dark sense of humour, all have a very good sense of humour and a very broad sense of humour, a very wide range, I would say. But I have met a couple that happen to be the same two that weren't, were escalators rather than de-escalators of situations. A sense of humour.
I must be honest, I was given some great advice many, many years ago. They said, first of all, you need to learn to leave this job at the door. And when you come in the next day, it's a new day. You might fall out with a prisoner, have an argument. From your point of view, you need to come in and start again as if that never happened. And just crack on with that, because you're going to end up with a lifetime or career time of battles, and that will get you in the end. When I first joined the service, one of my first places I went to was Gloucester Prison. And I was there for about 2 weeks. And the training officer said, I just want you to go into that unit there. And he said, I want you to sit down and read the records. This was a unit called the National 43 Unit, which was housing some of those prisoners. When I talk about your Ian Huntleys and your Fred West, you'll understand what I mean. I didn't know this at the time. He said, pop in that records office, take a cup of coffee, have a good read through the records. And I did. And I saw things that appalled me. I was 24 years old at the time. I thought it was appalling. I was shocked, disgusted, not being exposed to those. I couldn't believe it. And when I went back to see him, he said, well, I said, my head's gone. My head's gone. I can't cope with it. And he said, good, I'm glad. He said, don't ever open a prisoner's record again out of curiosity unless you have to do your job. You don't need to be taking all this stuff home with you. Whatever they've done, you just stand in, they're just prisoners. And you just, when they're in prison, they're prisoners. So because you've got to survive that. You've got to go home. You've got a family to live with. And you don't need to be reading all these things. You'll know some of them anyway, because you're going to have to know that thing. But unless you need to do your job, don't read these things out of curiosity.
So interesting to hear you say that. And I can see Harris almost throwing stuff at me again to finish off, because we've gone over. And now I think we wouldn't get to 45 minutes. And it's so interesting to hear you say that, because on the opposite side of that coin, my wife, who was a psychologist working predominantly with sex offenders doing behavioural change programs, her job was to read those files, understand them and know them inch by inch, bit by bit, every single aspect of every single crime, and then run programs with prisoners.
What you see on TV has been cleaned up for public consumption.
Absolutely.
When you start to dig into what these things really did, the nitty gritty, they're awful. Remember, and I can appreciate with a psychologist, they have a specific piece of work to do, so they focus on that. I've got to run a landing outside all that. So knowing those things, if I don't need to know them, are not necessary for me. They're not. Because we do two different things, of course. But
Okay, let's finish up there. Otherwise, we'll be down another rabbit hole, and I'll get in serious trouble. So, Shepton Mallet Prison at the moment. So, our attraction at Shepton Mallet Prison that you can see here is currently closed. It's obviously based in Somerset. It's currently in a tier 3 restriction, which means it has to stay shut. The team are still going in every single day, or some of the team are going in every single day, do the building checks to make sure everything's okay. It's obviously a big old building dating back to 1610, so 400 years old. There's a lot to do, there's a lot to manage, and obviously to make sure that it's still all okay and everything's running correctly as it should be. They are also doing a couple of enhancements whilst they're there, so it will reopen coming straight out of blocks once again, ready for customers as soon as it's allowed to effectively. We don't know what that's going to be. Hopefully we'll find out later today with some announcements, but certainly it is ready to go, and you can still buy tickets for future dates. We just don't know exactly when it's obviously going to reopen, but I know a lot of the events are very popular, especially the overnight sleepover. I think the waiting list, or the list to buy tickets, is probably about 3 or 4 months down the line, isn't it, Harriet? So yeah, so if you're looking at doing events in Shepton Mallet for this spring or summer, I would suggest having a look and getting that booked soon, because we will obviously be back open for then, but they will sell very, very fast. Shrewsbury Prison, on the other hand. So Shrewsbury Prison is sat in a tier 2. Should we use that one? We use the Governor's House. It's sat currently in a tier 2 in Shropshire, but we actually made the decision, and we announced the decision yesterday, that we are going to close later today. So we've got a couple of tours today. We've got the ghost tours this evening, and then we're going to close the gates for at least 2 weeks, just to allow, I guess, COVID just to kind of go away a little bit more. It's just a little bit too high. There's a bit too much risk, we feel, and certainly I feel, to keep an attraction of our magnitude open. Now, bearing in mind, we're one of the safest attractions you can come to because of the size, because of the scale, because of the way we run, because it was purposely designed for social distancing people from society and from each other. So it is the most purpose-built building, really, for social distancing. But with the numbers we have coming through the doors, with the risks and the rates and the potential risk, we just felt that we'd be adding more to the problem rather than the solution. I wasn't prepared to do that. So we have made the decision to close for a couple of weeks to the 14th of January. That may get taken out of our hands later.
Yes, big announcement.
It may not.
This afternoon.
But you absolutely will be able to visit us again from that point forwards. We absolutely expect from the February half term to really be ramping everything back up. And again, we are doing work behind the scenes inside the buildings, getting things to a better experience, or a more enhanced experience. So
absolutely,
lots going on.
Look forward to getting all those people in front of me.
I was going to say, you like having them there,
lock
don't you?
people up again. I just can't help it.
But we will still continue to do the lives. So that's the key thing here, is every Wednesday we're going to keep doing these, keep cracking on.
Yeah.
Officer Goodwin has been released from duty every Wednesday, so he can come and do these lives at 11 o'clock. So we're going to do that every week. Obviously a different subject every week. Next week, Harriet, is employment.
And work in prisons.
Work. Okay. Yeah, there we go. We spoke about this, didn't we? Because I wanted to talk about why I've got very strong feelings on this one.
In different courses,
So we're going to do work and employment and such next week for prisons. Other than that, I think we're there. So I think it's. I hope you had a good Christmas and a happy New Year.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a healthy 2021, guys. Hopefully we'll all get there in the end, and make your resolutions, make them smart.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions and your comments and everything. And yes, we will see you in 2021.
Yeah, goodbye.